Let's now explore the second phase of Romanticism. Be sure to go through the phase 1 of Romanticism video if you haven't already. Now, if phase 1 of Romanticism was about setting the stage for a new era of geniuses where emotions and feelings mattered over logic and reason, phase 2 of Romanticism dramatized the movement and made it even more radical, even more intense, and even more passionate. It also made it political. It entered the era of scandalous poets, political radicals, doomed geniuses, obsessive idealists, people who just couldn't settle for like minimalist, subtle expressions. The second generation romantics were celebrities, and Europe was fascinated by them. Their affairs, their politics, their messy lives, and even their tragic deaths. Many of them died tragic deaths. And at the center of it are three figures: there's Lord Byron, there's Percy Bysshe Shelley, and there's John Keats. Three completely different personalities and three completely different visions of romanticism, and yet they string this romanticism ideals together. Flamboyant would be an understatement to describe the personality that was Lord Byron. He was fashionable, arrogant, witty, chaotic, and also quite controversial for his time. George Gordon, famous as Lord Byron, lived quite the colourful life. For starters, he kept a bear as a pet in his college dorm, and he had a series of love affairs throughout his life, and people were obsessed with him for his personal life. There's even a famous statement, there's a famous line by Lord Byron in which he says, I awoke one morning and found myself famous. So, an overnight popularity, fame is what he got. And actually carefully cultivated this image to become the rock star celebrity influencer of 19th century romanticism. Of course, he was a prolific poet above all. He is known for his work Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, which is a lengthy narrative poem describing the travels of a brooding young man who is sick of the world. It was Childe Harold's Pilgrimage was so iconic that it introduced a character trope in literature that is still used today, which is the Byronic hero. A male character who is dark, brooding, mysterious, emotionally tortured, morally ambiguous, seductive, and rebellious. Like Batman. Batman is a quintessential Byronic hero, or Heathcliff from Wuthering Heights, or Mr. Rochester from Jane Eyre. I think even Mr. Darcy could be considered a Byronic hero. Mr. Darcy from Pride and Prejudice, or even Jon Snow from Game of Thrones could be considered a Byronic hero. Then he also wrote Don Juan, which is an unfinished masterpiece, but it's pronounced Don Juan and not Don Juan as per the legend. But yes, he sort of, it was like a rewriting of the Don Juan legend, where the legendary character Don Juan is portrayed as an innocent man easily seduced by women. That was Lord Byron's version of it. His famous lyric poems include She Walks in Beauty, When We Two Parted, Beppo, Mazeppa, and The Vision of Judgment. He also wrote Oriental tales and verse plays during his lifetime. And there was a unique blend, okay? He blended romantic imagery that was introduced by Wordsworth and cynical wit as well in his writing. So he blended that uh, typical romanticism where romantic imagery was paramount, and he blended it with cynicism, he blended it with wit, and he took romanticism to a whole new level in the phase 2. And that is why Lord Byron remains very significant. Percy Bysshe Shelley, or P.B. Shelley, was all about visionary lyrics and radical political views. Like his romantic predecessors like Wordsworth or Coleridge, he genuinely believed poetry could transform humanity. He was quite revolutionary as well for his time. For starters, he was openly atheist back then, and he wrote an essay, a fiery essay on atheism, for which he was expelled from Oxford. He also openly opposed the British monarchy and he called for democracy. He also strongly supported women's rights and also supported freedom of the press. P.B. Shelley believed that imagination itself was political. It was political to have good imagination, and that poets could reshape consciousness was his faith. Unlike Lord Byron's cynicism, Shelley almost sounds optimistic, prophetic. So that is the difference. And in his poem Ode to the West Wind, there is this line: If winter comes, can spring be far behind? And that hope, that is the hope that Shelley stood for, and that hope after devastation becomes central to Shelley's themes, or Shelley's poetry, or what Shelley believed. And other famous works of his include Ozymandias, which is a sonnet about a ruined statue in a desert, To a Skylark, and The Mask of Anarchy. Then there's Prometheus Unbound, which is a long four-act drama which reimagines the Greek myth of Prometheus. He also wrote an essay called The Defense of Poetry that asserts the social value of art and ends with the famous line, "Poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world." And I think this is very pertinent even in today's times, especially in today's times. Now, we cannot talk about phase two romantics or romanticism in itself without Mary Shelley. Okay, because she did something quite iconic for her time. Her mother was Mary Wollstonecraft, an iconic writer herself who advocated for women's rights during her lifetime. Now, one rainy day in Switzerland, Mary Shelley was together with her husband P.B. Shelley and their friends Lord Byron and Lord Byron's doctor John Polidori. They were all friends. And they were all trapped in a mansion because there was stormy weather outside. There was lightning, thundering, raining. And they all challenged each other. First of all, they were telling ghost stories to each other, and ultimately they decided to enter into a ghost story writing competition. And that competition, it produced two great pieces in literature. John Polidori wrote The Vampire, and Mary Shelley came up with her own masterpiece, which is a combination of gothic horror, science fiction, dark academia, and romanticism, which is Frankenstein. Underneath it all, Frankenstein is a product of its time. It is a romantic text because it questions creation, it explores isolation and the limits of human ambition, loneliness, and warns us of the dangers of uncontrolled scientific progress. Kind of introduced the mad scientist. The mad scientist trope emerged as a result of Frankenstein. That's how iconic it was. And finally, John Keats. Now, John Keats feels quite different from Byron and Shelley. I mean, Byron and Shelley were also quite different from each other, but John Keats has this very distinctive quality because he's less political and more sensual in his works. He was more obsessed with the idea of beauty, like his romantic predecessors. But he was also deeply haunted by mortality and the human condition because of his personal experiences in life. He lived quite a tragic life and suffered a young death. Actually, people did not take John Keats very seriously because of his Cockney background, Cockney accent, which was the working class or lower class dialect of English that was looked down upon by the elite since it was considered lower class Cockney accent or Cockney dialect. The elite, higher class people kind of did not take it very seriously. So during his lifetime, he was not really associated with Romanticism. Since Romanticism was already considered a literary movement during those times, um, John Keats, because of his Cockney accent, Cockney dialect, was not considered at par with the other romantics. But after his death, he became an enduring romantic icon, and he is now widely regarded as one of the greatest English poets of all time. That is what his legacy is as at this point. He was known for writing odes, Ode on a Grecian Urn, which explores immortality through art, Ode on Melancholy, which argues that true sadness is deeply tied to intense joy, and Ode to a Nightingale, which focuses on a person trying to escape painful realities and sufferings of life by joining a nightingale's enchanting song. So, John Keats was known for his odes. Other major narrative works include Hyperion, The Eve of Saint Agnes, and Endymion. John Keats developed one of the famous. He also developed one of the most famous romantic ideas ever, which is negative capability. It was his theory that a great thinker or an artist can remain in uncertainty, doubt, or mystery without desperately forcing logical answers. A poet or an artist need not look for logical answers. He can just embrace that uncertainty, which is basically the opposite of hyper rational thinking of the neoclassical times or age of enlightenment. And if that doesn't scream romanticism, I don't know what does. So he was quite romantic, even though during his time he was not considered as one. Other romantic age writers, of course, we have got one of the most iconic writers who has stood the test of time, who is Jane Austen. She needs no introduction. A great novelist. Her stories, kind of, I feel they stand at the blend or at the intersection of neoclassicism, romanticism, and realism. Because so her novels like Persuasion, Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, Emma, they kind of stand. They are a blend of romanticism, realism, right? And they have stood the test of time for that. Then there was Sir Walter Scott, who was a Scottish historical novelist whose sweeping epics popularized the historical romance genre. Then there were William Hazlitt and Charles Lamb, who were celebrated essayists, and they basically championed personal journalism and literary criticism during the Romantic age. Now, something really important happens with this Romantic generation. They aestheticize sadness and suffering. Okay, they have turned sadness and suffering into an aesthetic. Not necessarily because they enjoyed suffering, but because they believed that intense emotion revealed profound truth. And intense emotion, like joy and suffering, were two sides of the same coin, and that is what made us human. And the second generation romantics also completely transformed how society imagines artists. Okay, before this, during the age of enlightenment, artists were often seen as skilled craftsmen who went by the poetic meter, by rules, by logic and reason. But after romanticism, the artist becomes a visionary, a misunderstood person, an emotionally intense individual, alienated from society, who just, who is a pariah. But also the modern idea of the creative genius or the tortured poet or the tortured artist, it largely comes from romanticism, which is why romanticism remains both fascinating and complicated. But which is also why romanticism still feels relatable and incredibly fresh even to this day, because these ideals have never really left, never really disappeared. We have just repurposed them. We still live with the same anxieties. Technology advancing too quickly, the advent of AI, people are feeling emotionally disconnected due to social media addiction. Questions about authenticity are arising because of influencer culture or consumerism, overconsumption, because of becoming mechanical due to corporate burnout. And there is always an intense longing for meaning. Even more so now that we can barely differentiate between human and AI. We have deep fakes. So, culturally, we still toy with romantic ideals constantly. Even the romantic age, sort of, we would say, there was an end of an era, but the romantic ideals still remain. So, it has never really disappeared. And I feel like it's almost like we have entered a new romantic era. That's what I feel, because we have um, aestheticized romanticism. We talk about romanticizing life, romanticize your life, or we have all these different aesthetics like the cottage core aesthetic or the fairy core aesthetic or the soft girl aesthetic. These are all products of romanticism, those ideals uh, that were planted back then by these people. And thanks for watching. And also, I would love to know your thoughts about romanticism. So please do feel free to share them. And do subscribe if you would like more such literary deep dives. Thank you. Bye.